Admiral Ta-1 stared at the holographic display, his weathered face illuminated by the red warning indicators that filled the command center. The massive screen showed thousands of enemy ships moving through Alliance space like a swarm of deadly insects. Each red dot represented a Void Dominion vessel, and they were everywhere. The Galactic Alliance's last defensive line was crumbling. Their most advanced ships, built with technology developed over thousands of years, were being torn apart by the enemy's superior weapons. Beside him, Senator Hanji gripped the tactical table until her knuckles turned white, her usual diplomatic composure slipping away as she watched their forces fall. "The Void Dominion has breached our quantum barriers in 3 sectors," reported Captain Sumin from her station, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. She typed rapidly on her console, trying to get better readings. "We've lost contact with the 7th Fleet. All 40,000 ships, just gone." A heavy silence fell over the command center. The loss of an entire fleet was unprecedented in Alliance history. The 7th Fleet had been their strongest, equipped with their newest quantum-based weapons and staffed by their most experienced crews. Tai-1 closed his eyes, decades of military experience telling him what everyone feared to voice. They were losing. The Alliance, with all its advanced technology and united species, was failing against an enemy that seemed to counter their every move with mechanical precision. Their best strategies, refined over centuries of peace and limited conflicts, were useless against the Void Dominion's perfect responses. "Admiral," one of the junior officers called out, "the Void Dominion is deploying their phase shift devices. They're cutting through our remaining defense lines like they don't even exist." Tai-1 watched as more red warning indicators appeared on the display. The enemy ships moved with unnatural coordination, their formations shifting and adapting instantly to any resistance they encountered. It was like fighting against a single giant mind that could think faster than any organic being. "We need to evacuate the civilian populations from the border worlds," he ordered, his voice grave. "Begin emergency protocols for—" "There might be one option left," Hanji interrupted softly. She pulled up ancient records from her datapad, her hands shaking slightly as she accessed files that hadn't been viewed in generations. The holographic display shifted, showing an image of a blue-green planet that none of them recognized. "Senator, this isn't the time for history lessons," Ta-1 began, but stopped when he saw the look in her eyes. "There's a species we quarantined centuries ago," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. The command center grew quiet as staff members turned to listen. The Alliance Council voted to isolate them because they were too unpredictable, too dangerous. Su-Min moved closer to look at the records. "I've never heard of this species. Why would we quarantine an entire civilization?" Hanji touched her datapad, and new images appeared, recordings of battles and conflicts that made several officers gasp. They showed primitive spacecraft engaging in maneuvers that defied standard combat logic, ground forces using tactics that seemed suicidal yet somehow succeeded, and innovations that broke every rule of conventional warfare. "They're called humans," Hanji said, looking up at the Admiral. "While we built our civilization on order and logic, they evolved through chaos and constant conflict. Their entire history is filled with wars that would horrify our people, but they survived. They adapted. They developed ways of fighting that no rational species would ever consider." Tai-1 studied the records carefully. "Why haven't I heard of them before?" "Because the Council was afraid," Hanji admitted. "We watched them split the atom of their smallest element just to create weapons. We saw them turn their own planet's resources into tools of destruction. They fought wars that should have ended their civilization, yet they emerged stronger each time. The Council decided they were too dangerous to join the galactic community." A new alert sounded, and everyone turned back to the main display. 3 more Alliance fleets had fallen to the Void Dominion's advance. "The enemy beats us because they can predict everything we do," Hanji said, her voice stronger now. "Their quantum computers analyze our tactics and counter them perfectly. But these humans, she gestured to the historical records. Look at how they fight. There's no pattern, no logic. They do things that no sane species would attempt. And somehow they succeed. Taiwan studied the records for a long moment, watching recordings of human battles that defied conventional military doctrine. Their ships performed maneuvers that should have torn them apart. Their ground forces used strategies that seemed to embrace chaos itself as a weapon, even if we wanted to contact them. Sumin said, "The quarantine beacons have kept them isolated for centuries. They might not have developed space travel yet." Hanji shook her head. "We've been monitoring them. They've reached their system's edge now, and they're advancing quickly. More importantly, they've been fighting among themselves all this time, developing new ways of warfare that even we can't predict." Another alert sounded. The Void Dominion had taken 2 more star systems. Taiwan straightened his uniform and made the decision that would change the galaxy forever. Send a ship to their world. If the Void Dominion can predict everything we do, then perhaps we need allies who are truly unpredictable. He looked at the image of Earth one more time. Contact the humans. Tell them everything. If we're going to survive this war, we need their chaos. The Alliance diplomatic vessel broke through Earth's cloud cover, its advanced cloaking systems ensuring it remained invisible to human detection systems. Ambassador Jeho stood at the observation window, watching the blue-green planet grow larger as they descended. Despite his centuries of diplomatic experience, his hands were shaking slightly. "Are you certain about this approach?" asked his assistant, Kaiwan, checking their prepared statements one final time. Landing in the open, in front of their global leadership. "We don't have time for subtle first contact protocols," Jeho replied. "The Void Dominion takes another Alliance world every day we delay." The ship's sensors showed hundreds of human military vehicles surrounding their chosen landing site, a large open area near what the humans called the United Nations headquarters. Primitive projectile weapons and missiles were aimed at their position, even though the humans couldn't see them yet. "They're definitely aggressive," noted the ship's captain. "Our sensors detect enough firepower down there to level a small city." Jeho nodded. "That's exactly why we need them." The ship decloaked as it touched down, revealing itself to the waiting humans. Jeho watched their reactions through the external cameras. Instead of panic, he saw discipline. The human forces adjusted their positions smoothly, establishing clear fields of fire while maintaining protective formations. It was the reaction of warriors, not frightened primitives. "They're requesting communication," Kaiwan reported. "Put them through." A human voice, speaking in their own language, came through the ship's translators. "Unknown vessel, you have entered restricted airspace. Identify yourself immediately." Jeho took a deep breath and responded. "People of Earth, I am Ambassador Jeho of the Galactic Alliance. We come seeking your help." The landing ramp lowered, and Jeho walked out into Earth's sunlight. The human military forces were closer now, their weapons still aimed but not firing. A group of humans in formal attire approached, escorted by guards in dark suits. The United Earth Council chamber was larger than Jeho had expected, filled with representatives from every human nation. General Park sat at the center of the main table, her posture rigid with contained energy. The other human leaders watched silently as Jeho explained their situation. "You're telling us," General Park began, leaning forward in her chair, "that we were deliberately kept isolated because we were deemed too unpredictable." "Yes," Jeho replied, watching their reactions carefully. "But now we need that unpredictability. The enemy we face, the Void Dominion, they use advanced quantum computers to predict and counter every strategy we attempt. Their technology surpasses ours in every way." "And you think we can help?" asked another human leader. "You just said their technology is superior to yours, and yours is clearly far beyond ours." Jeho activated a holographic display, showing recordings of the recent battles. The humans leaned forward, their eyes analyzing every detail of the space combat. "The Void Dominion wins because they can calculate every possible move we might make," Jai-Ho explained. Their computers process the data and determine the perfect counter-strategy. But you humans, he paused, choosing his words carefully. You do things no logical species would consider. Your military history is filled with strategies that should have failed, yet succeeded because they were too irrational to predict. Rather than anger at being called irrational, he saw something unexpected in the human's eyes: anticipation. The military officers in the room were already studying the battle footage, pointing out tactical details to each other. These Void Dominion ships, General Park said, they move in perfect formations. No adaptability, no individual initiative. Like a computer program. Exactly, Jai-Ho confirmed. Every ship acts as part of a single coordinated system. A smile spread across General Park's face. Then they've never faced an enemy who embraces chaos as a strategy. They've never dealt with human ingenuity. Within hours, the Earth's military leaders were planning. Within days, the world's nations had unified under a single banner, ready to join a war that threatened the galaxy. Jai-Ho watched in amazement as centuries-old rivalries were set aside in the face of a common enemy. We'll need to modify our ships, General Park told him during a planning session. Your technology is advanced, but it's too predictable, too perfect. We need to introduce some human elements. What do you mean? Your ships are designed to fight perfect battles, she explained. We need them to fight messy ones. To do things the enemy's computers would consider impossible or illogical. We need to add chaos to your order. As Jai-Ho prepared to return to Alliance space with Earth's response, he watched human engineers already swarming over his ship, their minds working in ways his people would never consider. They saw possibilities where his people saw only established protocols. You're not angry about the quarantine? He asked General Park before departing. About being kept isolated for centuries. She shrugged. Would we have been ready for this if you hadn't? Those centuries of isolation forced us to innovate, to fight our own battles, to develop ways of warfare that your people never needed. You gave us time to become exactly what the galaxy needs right now. As the diplomatic vessel lifted off, Jai-Ho looked down at the rapidly mobilizing planet below. The Alliance had feared human unpredictability, had seen it as a danger to galactic peace. Now that same chaos might be the only thing that could save them all. The Void Dominion was about to learn why the Alliance had quarantined humanity, and for the first time since the war began, Jai-Ho felt hope. Colonel Min-Su stood before the massive holographic display in the Alliance flagship's tactical center, watching the gathered alien commanders shift uncomfortably in their seats. The simulation showed their traditional fleet formations, perfect geometric patterns that looked beautiful, but as Min-Su had quickly realized, were utterly predictable. Your entire fleet moves like it's following a textbook, Min-Su explained, using a laser pointer to highlight the rigid formations. That's why the Void Dominion predicts everything you do. Look at how your ships maintain exact distances, perfect angles, textbook attack vectors. Commander Yu-Jin, the youngest tactical officer in Alliance history, leaned forward in her seat. Unlike her older colleagues, she seemed more curious than offended by the humans' assessment. These formations are based on centuries of space combat experience, she said. They maximize our defensive coverage and offensive capabilities. Min-Su nodded. And that's exactly the problem. The Void Dominion's quantum computers have analyzed every battle you've ever fought. They know your doctrine better than you do. She pressed a button, and the display changed to show recordings of recent defeats. See how they counter each movement before you even complete it. They're not reacting to your actions, they're reacting to your training. The human officer began manipulating the holographic ships, rearranging them into patterns that made several Alliance commanders wince. Ships' clusters seemed randomly scattered, spacing varied wildly, and attack vectors followed curved paths instead of straight lines. But these formations you suggest, they're chaos. Yu-Jin exclaimed, half horrified and half fascinated. Organized chaos, Min-Su corrected with a smile. And that's exactly what the enemy can't compute. Their quantum computers are designed to find patterns and calculate countermoves. But human military history teaches us that sometimes the best pattern is no pattern at all. She brought up historical footage from Earth's naval battles. Look at how our submarines operated in the Second World War. They didn't follow fixed patrol routes or attack patterns. They created uncertainty, made the enemy waste resources trying to defend everywhere at once. An older Alliance admiral raised his hand. But space is three-dimensional. The complexity makes it even better. Min Su interrupted. Instead of thinking about fleet movements like a chess game, think of it like a swarm of bees. Each ship maintains general awareness of its allies, but operates with individual initiative. The overall pattern emerges from chaos, making it impossible to predict. She demonstrated with another simulation. The scattered Alliance ships suddenly coalesced into attack formations, struck from unexpected angles, then broke apart again before the enemy could respond. The Void Dominion's perfect formation struggled to adapt to threats that came from seemingly random vectors. Look at how their response time slows, Min Su pointed out. Their computers are trying to find patterns that don't exist. They're burning processing power trying to predict the unpredictable. Commander Yu Jin had moved to stand beside the holographic display, her eyes bright with understanding. We could use our quantum drives differently too, she said excitedly. Instead of coordinated jumps, we could have each ship calculate its own random trajectory within general parameters. Exactly. Min Su grinned at her. Now you're thinking like a human. The key isn't to outcalculate the enemy. It's to present them with too many variables to calculate at all. The other commanders began to join in, centuries of rigid tactical doctrine giving way to new possibilities. They suggested modifications to their ship's artificial intelligence, ways to introduce controlled randomness into their targeting systems, and formations that looked like mistakes but concealed deadly traps. There's an old human saying, Min Su told them, the enemy of perfect is good enough. Your ships and crews are trying to fight perfect battles. We need to teach them to fight messy ones instead. She showed them more Earth military history, guerrilla warfare, asymmetric conflicts, battles won by forces that should have been hopelessly outmatched. The Alliance commanders began to see their own technology in a new light, not as tools for executing perfect strategies, but as weapons that could be used in ways their creators never intended. We'll need to retrain every crew, one commander pointed out. Our people are conditioned to follow precise protocols. Good, Min Su replied, because the first rule of human warfare is that no plan survives contact with the enemy. Your crews need to learn to think on their feet, to trust their instincts, to embrace controlled chaos as a tactical advantage. Commander Yu Jin was already modifying the simulation, introducing elements of randomness into the Alliance fleet's movements. The holographic ships danced in patterns that looked like confusion but contained hidden purpose. When she ran the combat simulation, the Void Dominion's perfect formations began to break down, their responses becoming increasingly erratic as they failed to predict the Alliance's next move. This goes against everything we've been taught, she said, but her voice held excitement rather than doubt. Our entire approach to space warfare will have to change. Min Su smiled at her enthusiasm. That's exactly what we need. The Void Dominion expects you to fight like the Alliance always has. Instead, we're going to teach you to fight like humans. And if there's one thing humans do well, it's finding ways to win when victory seems impossible. The tactical center buzzed with energy as the commanders began to see their war in a new light. They weren't just learning new formations. They were learning a new way of thinking about combat itself. And in their eyes, Min Su saw the first glimmer of something the Alliance had lost in recent battles. Hope. Chief Engineer Sang Mei stared at the modified quantum drive in Jin Wu's hands with a mixture of horror and fascination. The human technician had somehow rewired the delicate machinery in ways that violated at least 30 Alliance safety protocols. You want to do what? Sang Mei asked, her voice rising in disbelief as she scanned the modifications with her diagnostic tools. The readings made no sense. Energy was flowing in patterns that should have been impossible. Jin Woo grinned, holding up the modified drive. "We're going to turn your shield generators into weapons. Trust me, it'll work. Look at these readings. If we reverse the polarity of the quantum field and feed it through the shield emitters, we can create a cascading energy wave." "That's not possible," Sang Mei protested. "The safety interlocks would never allow." "Already bypassed them," Jin Woo interrupted, pointing to a series of jury-rigged circuits. "See, your systems are designed to be perfect, to never do anything dangerous or unexpected. But sometimes you need dangerous and unexpected." Around them, the Alliance battleship's engineering bay was a hive of activity. Other human technicians were working on similar modifications, their approach to technology shocking the Alliance engineers. They treated the advanced machinery not as sacred artifacts to be preserved, but as tools to be adapted and repurposed. "But the quantum harmonics would," Sang Mei began. "Create a feedback loop, yes," Jin Woo finished. "But that's exactly what we want. When the Void Dominion ships hit our shields with their energy weapons, instead of just absorbing or deflecting the attack, we'll amplify it and send it right back at them. Their perfect calculations won't account for their own weapons being turned against them." Sang Mei watched as he made final adjustments to the drive. His movements weren't precise and measured like Alliance engineers. They were quick, almost casual, guided by intuition as much as knowledge. It went against everything she had learned about handling advanced technology. Across Alliance space, similar scenes were playing out. Humans began introducing modifications and tactics that defied conventional wisdom. Mining ships had their excavation beams converted into makeshift weapons. Cargo haulers were fitted with improvised armor and repurposed agricultural equipment. Every piece of technology was seen as a potential weapon, waiting to be reimagined. The first test of these modifications came sooner than expected. A Void Dominion patrol encountered a small Alliance fleet near the Centaurid border. The Alliance ships were older models, mostly retrofitted cargo vessels that had been deemed too obsolete for the front lines. But these ships had been modified by human engineers. When the Void Dominion opened fire with their precise, calculated attacks, something unexpected happened. The Alliance ship shields didn't just absorb the energy. They captured it, amplified it, and sent it back in chaotic bursts that overwhelmed the enemy's defenses. Mining beams, originally designed to cut through asteroids, had been modified to emit random frequency shifts that confused enemy targeting systems. Cargo tractors projected gravitational fields in patterns that defied prediction. Even the ship's engines had been altered to produce interference patterns that played havoc with Void Dominion sensors. "It's working," Sang Mei exclaimed, watching the battle data stream in. The Void Dominion ships were falling back, their perfect formations breaking down as they encountered weapons and tactics their computers couldn't classify. Jin Woo nodded, already working on new modifications. "That's the thing about humans. We don't just think outside the box. We take the box apart and build something new with the pieces." The victory spread quickly through Alliance communications. More ships began adopting the human modifications, each crew adding their own improvisations. The rigid standardization that had made Alliance technology so vulnerable to Void Dominion prediction began to disappear, replaced by a chaotic variety of jury-rigged systems and unconventional tactics. "But how do you know what will work?" Sang Lei asked Jin Woo later as they prepared more modifications. "There's no way to calculate all the variables." "We don't try to," he explained, hands deep in the guts of another quantum drive. "Humans learned long ago that sometimes the best solution isn't the perfect one. It's the unexpected one. Your technology is amazing, but you built it to be predictable. We're teaching it to be surprising." As news of the victory spread, more Alliance engineers began to embrace the human approach. They learned to see their technology not as finished products, but as starting points for innovation. The Void Dominion's perfect calculations became their weakness. They couldn't adapt to opponents who refused to follow the rules of conventional warfare. Maybe that's why they quarantined us, Jin Wu mused as they worked. Not because we were dangerous, but because we make everything around us a little more chaotic, a little more human. Sangme looked at the modified drive, seeing it with new eyes. And that's exactly what we need right now, isn't it? A little chaos in our perfection. Jin Wu grinned and handed her a tool. Want to learn how to break some more rules? She took the tool, ready to see what impossible things they could make reality today. The war was far from over, but for the first time, the Alliance had something the Void Dominion couldn't predict or counter: human ingenuity. Captain Du-hyun stood on the bridge of the Alliance flagship, Thunder's Edge, watching in amazement as the battle unfolded before him. The massive view screen showed hundreds of Alliance ships, moving in patterns that would have horrified him just months ago. The fleet no longer maintained the perfect geometric formations that had been standard for centuries. Instead, they flowed like water, adapting and changing with every moment. Status report. He called out as another Void Dominion dreadnought erupted in a spectacular explosion, its perfect defenses overwhelmed by attacks coming from seemingly random vectors. Lieutenant He-yun's fingers danced across her console, her eyes bright with excitement. The enemy's predictive algorithms are failing, Captain. Their ships are showing increased response times. They can't anticipate our movements anymore. Do-hyun smiled as he watched his fleet execute what the human advisors called a flowing water maneuver. Ships moved in patterns based on ancient Earth military philosophies, creating the illusion of chaos while maintaining hidden order. Some vessels pushed forward aggressively, while others held back, breaking every rule of conventional space combat. Their quantum computers are trying to process too many variables, reported the tactical officer. Every time they think they've found a pattern, we change it. Their processing power is being wasted trying to predict the unpredictable. The Void Dominion fleet, once seemingly invincible, was starting to show signs of confusion. Their perfect formations, usually unbreakable, began to develop gaps as their commanders struggled to counter attacks that came from unexpected angles with unpredictable timing. Remember what the human advisors taught us, Du-hyun called out to his crew. Don't think about what the perfect move would be. Think about what the enemy would never expect us to do. A group of Alliance corvettes suddenly broke formation, spinning and weaving through space in what looked like a reckless charge. The Void Dominion ships adjusted their positions perfectly to intercept them, only to realize too late that the apparent attack was a diversion. The real strike came from behind, as larger ships emerged from carefully maintained sensor shadows. Look at their response times now, He-yun reported excitedly. 8 seconds. 10 seconds. Their computers are struggling to process our tactics. They're actually having to fall back on manual control. Do-hyun remembered the skepticism he'd felt when the human military advisors first proposed these changes. They had shown recordings of ancient Earth naval battles, of armies that won despite being outnumbered, of strategies that seemed to embrace chaos itself as a weapon. Signal the 7th Battle Group, he ordered. Execute Operation Thunderstorm. Across the battlefield, Alliance ships began implementing another human-inspired tactic. Instead of coordinating their attacks through central command, each ship captain was given the freedom to choose their own targets and methods. The only rule was to maintain general awareness of Allied positions and avoid friendly fire. The result was beautiful chaos. Small fighter groups darted between capital ships, their attack patterns resembling schools of fish more than military formations. Larger vessels used their modified weapons in ways that defied standard combat doctrine, creating overlapping fields of fire that seemed random but contained deadly purpose. Enemy flagship is showing signs of shield failure, He-yun reported. Their defensive algorithms can't handle the variable attack patterns. They're trying to adapt, but a massive explosion lit up the view screen as the Void Dominion flagship's shields finally collapsed under the assault. Do-hyun watched as the mighty vessel, once considered invincible, began to break apart. Send the signal to all ships, he ordered. press the advantage. Don't give their computers time to analyze and adapt. Keep changing patterns. Keep them guessing. The Alliance fleet surged forward like a wave breaking on a shore, each ship moving with individual purpose while contributing to the larger chaos. The Void Dominion's remaining ships began to retreat, their perfect formations shattering as they faced an enemy they couldn't predict. "Captain," Hei-Yun called out, her voice filled with wonder. "We're receiving signals from across the sector. Other Alliance fleets are reporting similar successes. The human tactics are working everywhere." Do-Hyun nodded, remembering the words of his human advisors. They had taught them that sometimes the strongest position was one of apparent weakness, that controlled chaos could overcome perfect order, that the best strategy was one the enemy's computers would dismiss as irrational. "Send word to Alliance Command," he ordered. "Tell them the human modifications to our tactics are proving more effective than we could have hoped. And tell them," he paused, watching another Void Dominion ship fall to their chaotic assault, "tell them we're ready to take the fight to enemy territory." As the battle drew to a close, Do-Hyun looked around his bridge. His crew, once rigid and protocol-bound, now moved with a new confidence. They had learned to trust their instincts, to embrace unpredictability as a strength rather than a weakness. The humans hadn't just taught them new tactics, they had taught them a new way of thinking about warfare itself. The stars beyond the view screen seemed brighter somehow, as if reflecting the hope that had been rekindled in the Alliance. For the first time since the war began, they weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. And somewhere out there, the Void Dominion's perfect machines were trying to calculate how to counter an enemy that refused to be predictable. They would fail, Do-Hyun knew, because they were trying to find patterns in chaos, and that was something their computers would never understand. Admiral Taiwan stood in the Alliance war room, surrounded by holograms showing their latest victories against the Void Dominion. The massive chamber buzzed with energy as officers from a dozen species discussed battle reports and planned future operations. Beside him, Colonel Min-Soo pointed to a tactical display showing the enemy's retreating forces. The war room itself had changed dramatically since the humans arrived. Gone were the rigid rows of monitoring stations and the precise, standardized displays. Now, information flowed in seemingly chaotic patterns, screens shifted and adapted based on need, and officers moved freely between stations, sharing ideas and insights. "We're not just fighting their ships," Min-Soo explained to the gathered commanders, her voice carrying across the room. "We're fighting their entire way of thinking. Every unpredictable action creates ripples their ordered society can't handle." She highlighted a series of recent battles where Alliance forces had used what the humans called asymmetric warfare. Small attack groups had struck Void Dominion supply lines, using modified civilian ships that the enemy's sensors dismissed as non-threats. Mining vessels converted into stealth bombers had slipped past their perfect defenses. Communication arrays had been reprogrammed to broadcast random signals that confused their targeting systems. "Look at how they respond," Min-Soo continued, showing tactical recordings. "Each time we do something unexpected, their entire command structure freezes for crucial seconds. They can't act without running predictions, and they can't predict what doesn't follow logical patterns." Admiral Taiwan watched his officers' reactions. The Alliance species were beginning to understand. Humanity's gift wasn't just their tactical innovation, but their ability to embrace and thrive in uncertainty. He saw it in the way they carried themselves now, more relaxed, more willing to trust their instincts alongside their training. "Their society is built on perfect order," Min-Soo explained, bringing up intelligence reports. "Every decision is calculated, every action predicted and planned. But humans," she smiled, "we learned long ago that life itself is chaos. The universe doesn't follow neat patterns. It's messy, unpredictable. And that's where we thrive." A young Alliance officer raised her hand. "But how do we maintain military discipline if we embrace chaos?" "Controlled chaos," Min-Soo corrected. "Think of it like a river. The water flows freely, adapting to every obstacle, but it still follows the basic laws of nature. Our ships and crews still maintain core protocols and safety measures, but we give them the freedom to adapt, to innovate, to surprise the enemy. Tai-1 stepped forward. "Show them the Centauri Gambit," he suggested. Min-Su nodded and brought up footage of their most recent major victory. Alliance ships had appeared to break formation and flee in panic, drawing the Void Dominion fleet into pursuit. But each seemingly random movement had been part of a larger plan, leading the enemy into a carefully prepared trap. Their quantum computers predicted a 99.8% chance that our forces were retreating in disarray. Min-Su explained. They couldn't conceive that apparent disorder might be intentional. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. The gathered officers watched in amazement as the scattered Alliance ships suddenly turned and attacked from multiple vectors, their apparent chaos resolving into deadly purpose. The Void Dominion fleet, caught off guard and with their formations broken by the pursuit, had suffered their worst defeat of the war. This is why the Alliance quarantined humanity centuries ago, Tai-1 added. They saw our unpredictability as a threat to galactic order. Now that same trait is saving us all. The war room's atmosphere had changed. Where once there had been fear and resignation, now there was energy and hope. Officers who had spent their careers following rigid protocols were learning to see possibilities in improvisation. "We've received reports from the frontier sectors," an intelligence officer announced. "The Void Dominion is pulling back their forces, establishing defensive lines. They're trying to create space to analyze our new tactics." Min-Su grinned. "Let them analyze. By the time they think they understand what we're doing, we'll be doing something completely different." The tactical displays showed Alliance forces advancing across multiple sectors, each fleet using different strategies, different modifications to their ships and weapons. There was no pattern for the enemy to predict, no standard doctrine to counter. "The next phase begins tomorrow," Tai-1 announced. "We'll be implementing what the humans call guerrilla warfare on a galactic scale. Small, fast-moving task forces striking targets of opportunity, never staying in one place long enough to be trapped." The officers began discussing the logistics, their conversations flowing naturally between different topics and ideas. The rigid hierarchy that had once defined Alliance military culture was evolving into something more fluid, more adaptive. "Remember," Min-Su concluded, "our greatest advantage isn't our weapons or our tactics. It's our ability to embrace uncertainty, to find opportunities in chaos. The Void Dominion sees the universe as a perfect machine. We know better. We know that true strength comes from adapting to the unexpected." As the briefing ended and officers moved to their assignments, Tai-1 looked at the tactical displays one last time. The patterns of battle had changed, becoming something organic and alive rather than mechanical and predicted. The Alliance had learned not just to fight like humans, but to think like them, to see chaos not as a force to be controlled, but as a tool to be wielded. The war was far from over, but its nature had fundamentally changed. And somewhere out there, the Void Dominion's perfect machines were trying to calculate how to fight an enemy that refused to be calculated. They would fail, because some things couldn't be reduced to numbers and predictions. Some things, like human ingenuity and the courage to embrace uncertainty, defied all calculation. The surrender of the Void Dominion came not with a thunderous final battle, but with a message transmitted across all frequencies. Their perfect system, built on absolute order and predictability, could not survive in a galaxy where humanity had introduced chaos as a strategic element. After months of increasing losses, their supreme command had reached an inescapable conclusion. They could not win a war against an enemy they could not predict. In the gleaming Alliance Council chambers, Senator Hanji stood at the central podium, her heart swelling with pride as she watched Earth's representatives take their seats among the gathered species. Behind her, Admiral Tai-1 and Colonel Min-Su shared knowing looks. The galaxy had changed forever, and humanity's supposed flaws had proven to be their greatest strength. The chamber itself reflected the transformation that had swept through Alliance space. Where once everything had been arranged in perfect geometric patterns, now there was a more organic flow to the arrangement. Species that had once prided themselves on rigid protocol now moved with greater freedom, embracing a touch of controlled chaos in their interactions. The war taught us many things, Hanji began, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. But perhaps the most important lesson was that perfection isn't found in order alone, but in the balance between chaos and control. She gestured to the human delegation, led by General Park, who sat among representatives of species that had once voted to quarantine Earth. Our new allies showed us that unpredictability isn't a weakness to be feared, but a strength to be embraced. They taught us that true adaptation requires the courage to break patterns, to think beyond established limits. The final battle reports scrolled across the chamber's displays. They told a story not of overwhelming force, but of continuous innovation. The Void Dominion's perfect formations had crumbled in the face of tactics they couldn't compute. Their flawless strategies had failed against enemies who refused to follow predictable patterns. In the end, Admiral Ta One added, stepping forward to join Hanji, the Void Dominion's greatest strength became their fatal weakness. They built their civilization on the belief that everything could be calculated, predicted, and controlled. When faced with human unpredictability, their entire system began to break down. Colonel Min-Su nodded, remembering the final days of the war. Void Dominion ships had started hesitating in battle, their commanders paralyzed by the inability to calculate optimal responses. Their society, based on perfect prediction, had begun to show cracks as they encountered more and more situations their computers couldn't analyze. The surrender terms are interesting, Hanji continued. They don't just address military concerns. The Void Dominion has requested our help, human help specifically, in learning to adapt to uncertainty. They want to understand how we thrive in chaos. The council chamber buzzed with conversation at this revelation. Species that had once feared human unpredictability were now seeking to learn from it. The galaxy was entering a new era, one where perfect order was no longer seen as the highest ideal. We're establishing cultural exchange programs, General Park announced, not just with the Alliance species, but with the Void Dominion as well. They want to understand how humans balance structure with spontaneity, how we find strength in apparent disorder. The displays showed images from across Alliance space, ships bearing new hybrid designs that combined Alliance technology with human innovation, training centers where different species learned to embrace controlled chaos, research facilities where rigid protocols were giving way to creative experimentation. The quarantine of Earth was based on fear, Hanji said softly. Fear that human unpredictability would disrupt the perfect order we thought we needed. Now we understand that the galaxy needs both, the stability of order and the adaptability of chaos. As the formal ceremony concluded, Hanji watched the various species mingling freely, their interactions no longer bound by strict protocols. The galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted, and that was exactly the point. The future would not be perfectly ordered, but it would be alive with possibilities. What do you think comes next? Admiral Ta One asked, joining her at the chamber's observation window. Hanji smiled, watching the stars that no longer seemed cold and distant, but alive with potential. I think we do what humans do best. We adapt, we innovate, we surprise ourselves. The age of perfect prediction is over. The age of beautiful chaos has begun. Outside the window, ships of all species moved in patterns that would have been unthinkable before the war. Some maintained the old, precise formations, while others moved with human-inspired unpredictability. Together, they created something new, a harmony of order and chaos, of prediction and surprise. The galaxy had learned perhaps the most important lesson of all, that true strength comes not from eliminating uncertainty, but from learning to thrive within it. And as Hanji watched the celebration unfold around her, she knew that this was just the beginning. The future would be unpredictable, chaotic, and more wonderful than any perfect calculation could have foreseen. And that was exactly how it should be.